Hi everyone, welcome to the explainer video for the Global Power Planning tool. The journey for how this was created and how we come about to have this very lovely learning tool is all listed in here in our user instruction manual, and it tells us of how the tool was created, and I and the team at Marimba created this tool for you. My name is Patricia Catherine Najita, and I'm glad to be explaining how this works. This tool has a couple of segments, and I know that as I speak to you, you also have a copy of it looking just like this right before you. And how this tool works is that it was designed to facilitate your learning, to facilitate fun, to facilitate growth, to facilitate ideation, to make it easier for you to come in a room and talk about the thematic areas within here in a way that is fun, but also leads to growth, both of person, organization, and entities. It can be used to facilitate learning in workshops, a tea break at the office, programmatic design at your organization, strategic design at a higher level, and whichever way you find use for this tool, apply it. What we have here, we have reflection questions that we see right here. We have scenarios, as you see them right here. We have equity strides, okay, right here. And then we have learning points. And fifth is the action prompts. And lastly, we have also a segment that is within this book that is called the storyline. And we're going to see how all these parts come together to form the tool and the learning that we use. And the purpose of this is to gauge the room, to understand how far everybody in the room is. It creates the atmosphere and also helps us understand and navigate how far along the spectrum of challenges or growth each of us in the room is, whether on an individual or organizational level. As the instructions say, the equity strides is very familiar to another game that is usually called the privilege walk. And how this is played is that we stand in a straight line as participants, and according to a card that is read from the equity strides, for example, have you experienced delays receiving a license or permit affecting your human rights work? If your answer to this is yes, that means you have experienced a challenge, you take a step back. If your answer is this is neutral, in other words, you have not experienced this, you take a line, you keep on the line. If your answer to this is no, you've never experienced the challenge, that means you have a privilege. Therefore, you take a step forward. And if we read the next card and say, have you ever had to use resources saved for programming instead, like extra checks and ministerial labs? If your answer to this is yes, a step back. If your answer to this is no, a step forward. If this doesn't apply to you, you stay on the line. By the end of the equity strides, we then judge whoever is the farthest back has faced the highest disadvantage when it comes to privilege. Whoever is still on the line is sort of on a neutral ground. It could be they moved forward and came back, or they moved back and came back forward, but this person is on a neutral ground when it comes to privilege. Whoever is farthest ahead has the highest level of privilege in the room. And when we know where everybody stands in terms of privilege, we are able to understand who needs more guidance, who needs more help, who needs more learning, and who needs more lessons out of this. The purpose of these is that it's just an interactive session through which we speak to one another to understand the different challenges, discuss them, but it's also something that bonds us, especially if we're in a room in which we know each other and understand each other to the level of organization or work that we do. How this works is that you read the card. And if I read a card, for example, I read that donor misalignment compliances complicates program design and impact. And I'm thinking, okay, have I faced this issue? Yes, I keep this card with me. I pick another and it reads that transparency about financial delays builds community trust, and I'm thinking, okay, this does not relate to me, but I think that it relates to my neighbor, I hand that card to my neighbor. However, if I find that it doesn't relate to anybody on the table and neither to me, I put it back on the pile. So by the end of this section, okay, you have your cards in what you picked that relates to you, or what a person handed to you that they feel relates to you. So that talks about the bond that we have in the group, that somebody understands you enough to think this relates to you, or this speaks to you, or to think to yourself that I think I can speak more about this. When we are done with that segment, we then discuss the cards and we say that, well, this card could relate to me about transparency because I faced this issue, or somebody speaks about a card and you say, okay, I gave that card to you and I remember because I know you've dealt with this, and then the person speaks about it as well. Or if you're in a room in which we don't know each other that well, and therefore you don't know who to pass the card to, it's okay to just pick the learning points and discuss them as a group, talk about the ideas they have, but ultimately building the group dynamics. We need to remember that we cannot work with the scenarios without having read the storyline, and the storyline is still provided in here with it from the third page onwards. Once you've read the storyline and understand the story of Sana, we understand the story of Tembo, and we understand the story of Rahma, Sana, Rahma, and Tembo. Once we understand the stories of these three people, then we can move on to play the scenarios. The purpose of this is for us to discuss the storyline vis-a-vis the thematic areas we have listed here, which are 5: shrinking civic space, CSO sustainability, mistrust of funding sources, context and customs versus westernization, and lastly, violence, which is GBV. So if you pick a scenario, you've read your storyline, pick a scenario, and then you say, this scenario talks about bureaucratic stranglehold. So we discuss this card as a group and decide that, according to what I see here, I believe that this card is an issue that falls under CSO sustainability because it's affecting how they navigated sustainability and how they continue to thrive. But another person will say, no, I think that this card is best placed under shrinking civic space, and this is why I think so. The purpose of the scenarios is for us to have a very healthy debate about the 5 thematic areas, but also talk about our challenges, share our experiences, broaden our knowledge, and ultimately by the end of this, we have a better understanding of the 5 thematic areas. We have experienced more from each other and learned more from one another, but also we've also learned to explore ideas from different points of standing as per the thematic areas that are in the group. Our reflection questions have been added just to give us deeper thought, okay, about the different ideas and the issues that are within this tool and the thematic areas. The main option here, or the way we use the reflection questions, is that we select those cards and discuss them according to the thematic areas, or we discuss them according to how they best apply to our context and have an in-depth discussion. For example, we shall pick a random reflection question here, and it asks, why do authorities use bureaucracy to control civic spaces, and what are the power dynamics at play? So that means as a group, if this question applies to us, we discuss it. If it doesn't, we move on to another and further our discussions and learnings. And these are not exactly assignments, it's just for you to think and grow your knowledge and broader points of discussion. Lastly, we can try a second question that asks, how do bureaucratic restrictions limit CSO program delivery across different contexts? This as well is just for discussion. And what these are is that they are a closeout assignment, okay, that helps us build what we've learned from the whole tool, bring it home together and making an actionable point forward. As our instructions say here, that when we get to the action prompts, we are imagining ourselves at the front line of the battlefield, and we are asking ourselves, what and who do we want with us at our front line? Which allies do we need or do we have? How long do we need to achieve or win this battle? And what's the best time to launch our campaign? Different questions like that. For example, here, our question reads, propose a policy reform to streamline CSO licensing in restrictive contexts. This is something you may not be able to do in the room, something you might take home and actually do on a greater scale as a whole organization, or it's something that could be a project outcome for you that you take on and you say, that action prompt is what we're going to do as a project outcome for us at our organization. All in all, that is how our power of learning tool works. Be flexible with it, be creative with it, and ultimately your learnings are your power. And this is the global power of learning tool. This was Patricia, and thanks to Mannion Daniels, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, Power of Learning, the Strengthening Civil Society Project, and Marimba for creating this and having with us something that's going to facilitate learning for us over a period of time. Ciao!